Yo, what's going on? This is the NRW, where nerds rule the world. It's your boy, Kuya P, aka Patrick Michael Strange, the Adobro, the Babinka boy, the leader of the Holla Holla homies in the Center gang of the ShoPowSho. And we are back for another amazing ShoPowSho episode. But unfortunately, the amazing Ates couldn't be here. As you all know, Kataphorric is out in Japan teaching, living life. I'm so happy for her because that is something she's always wanted to do. So she's still doing that. I think she extended a little bit. And from what I understand, she may extend again. And you know what? As long as she's happy, as soon as she gets back, we'll have her on. We're also trying to make those inroads to kind of make that time zone schedule work so we can have her on. Again, she will always be a part of the ShoPowSho family. So there's that. And our own Viva Valentina is leaving Virginia Beach to another area. I don't know if I want to say where because that's her business. I don't want to put her business out there. But the Stuffy Spa and the amazing Viva Valentina are moving to a new location. And so because of that, her schedules couldn't work out to be here. But I know they both send their love to y'all and as well to our special guest today, where I know they're going to be envious because the reason why we put this episode beyond highlighting our people is learning about our stories. As a Philam, growing up in the States, I didn't get that because I was taught, of course, because I live in the States, American history. And so my desire for Philippine history wasn't very much satiated unless I really dug into encyclopedias and went to the library or went onto that old school internet called dial-up before y'all had this amazing connection like y'all have now. We had to wait and listen to this weird buzz. And then it finally came on, and then that just took forever. But I tried, people. I tried because I wanted to know about my history. So anyway, I'm so thankful for our guest today. His name is Tom McKenna. He's an anthropologist. He's the leading authority on the Moros, the indigenous Muslims of the Philippines. We're going to learn all about that, how that's tied to the World War II. Here I have his amazing book. I'm so excited. I can't thank him enough for sending this over. When I see his smiling face, I'm going to have him sign it too and personalize it because I treasure these books and having a library of amazing Philippine stories. And so he's going to be our guest today. I can't wait to dig into this, learn all about the Moros and everything I don't know because I'm actually working on a few projects, as y'all know, and I'm trying to talk about our history. And so to have someone that has devoted his life and career to learning this material is going to be such a pleasure. So let me not wait any longer. Let me bring him on. Let me have him unmute. You will see him on the screen in just a few seconds. There he is. Please welcome Thomas McKenna, aka Tom. I'm shooting off air horns right now, Tom. And as you know, because you've watched the show, it's in post, so I don't deafen you. We're both getting very old, so I know we don't need that in our lives to deafen us. How are you today, sir?
Very good, very good. I'm very happy to be here with you, Kuya P, and thanks for that very generous introduction.
Definitely. Thank you. I, again, really appreciate it. You're an ally, as we also say, as Filipinos. And again, we should all be supporting and telling each other stories. And it's unfortunate that current history has done what it's done, but we can change history by becoming allies and supporting each other. So thank you for what you do and teaching me about something I don't know as a Filipino. So before we do that, what I would like to know is maybe just a little bit about yourself, how you became interested in this and kind of a little bit, again, even though you're not Filipino and that's kind of how we do our show, I'm curious to your history, what made you and drove you into learning about other people and other cultures, and especially this Moro culture.
Sure, great question. And yeah, let me start at the beginning. I grew up in San Francisco, in the city of San Francisco. I grew up in a blue-collar, middle-class neighborhood, a kind of neighborhood that doesn't exist anymore in San Francisco or a lot of places, unfortunately. It was also a very multi-ethnic neighborhood. San Francisco has always been a city of immigrants. And basically all my classmates, right, in grade school were either the grandchildren or the children of immigrants. I am the grandson of immigrants from Ireland. And what's interesting in my school, they're pretty much evenly divided between children or grandchildren of Irish immigrants or Italian immigrants or immigrants from Central America. This is back in the early 60s, from either El Salvador or mostly from El Salvador or Honduras, and Filipino children of Filipino immigrants, about evenly divided. Four boxes. I had Filipino classmates and playmates and neighbors. I was probably eating lumpia before I could read. Okay? That's so I state that not just to try to grab my ShoPowSho cred, but also to explain, in part why I became an anthropologist. I'm a cultural anthropologist. Cultural anthropologists study human cultural diversity. So that includes things like studying religions, ethnicity, ethnic identity, culture and gender, tradition and change, all that kind of stuff. And growing up with cultural diversity and an appreciation for cultural diversity, I was kind of primed to become an anthropologist. Parenthetically, one of the reasons I'm glad to be on here with you is because you and your co-hosts are also kind of doing anthropology when you spend time examining your own cultural roots, your identity, your history, and you do it really well from what I've seen with great sensitivity. So well done there. Okay, so that the way I grew up sort of explains why I became a cultural anthropologist. It does not explain why I ended up in the Philippines, because in fact, doing research in the Philippines, because in fact, as a child, my Filipino childhood neighbors all attended Catholic school with me. Their families went to weekly mass, just like my Irish Catholic family. And it wasn't just formal stuff. They had the same religious pictures in their house, right? So we shared a tremendous amount of culture, not just religious culture, but just generally culture. And so because the anthropologists usually study people who are culturally different from them, I had sort of crossed off the Philippines because Filipinos were too familiar, right? They were too, there's a lot of actually amazing similarities between Irish Catholics and Filipino Catholics we could go into sometime. But they didn't seem exotic enough because of the shared Catholicism and shared Catholic culture. But then I learned about the Moros, and the more I learned about the Moros, the more fascinated with them I became, and I kind of pursued a research project for my doctoral dissertation. And in 1985, which was the last full year of the Marcos dictatorship, I went to Mindanao to study the Moros. I spent 2 years there and lived with a family, as anthropologists tend to do, learned the language, lived in the community, lived like the people of the community lived, was wonderfully cared for in that community. And that's where I met Muhammad Adil, who's the main character in my story.
Wow. So there's a lot there. I'm curious, the start of the journey. So you chose that. I kind of like want to start how like that introduction to learning about the Moros, maybe a little bit, if you can maybe
Sure.
give me a little bit more about that and how that drove you a little bit more. What captivated you to learn more once that was first introduced, and then getting, people to sign off on that. And then to, how did you self-fund the trip? Did you get the school to pay? How did you go about doing that, especially as knowledge for others that are academics that want to maybe do a similar, path?
Sure, I'll answer your last question first, and then I'll tell you what I learned about the Moros, which everyone needs to know about the Moros because they're such fascinating people. As usually, I was doing doing research for a doctoral dissertation in anthropology at the University of California, Davis. And the usual way to fund that is to get a grant from a funding agency. I got my grant from the National Science Foundation. Just to give you a sense of how long ago this was, and how times have changed in terms of money. My grant was for $15,000. I spent almost 2 years in the Philippines, and I came back home with money. So it was it doesn't take a lot of money to do anthropology. That's one of the really wonderful things about it, because I'm all I need is a pen and a notebook and a lot of and plenty of time and people to talk to. So that part, that was actually the easy part, getting funded and being able to support myself during that time. Now I was there because of the Moros, and the Moros are indigenous Philippine Muslims. Okay, they are the indigenous Muslims of the Philippines. Important to know that there have been Muslims in the Philippines longer than there have been Christians. The Muslims, people were converted to Islam before they were converted by the Spaniards. Anyone was converted by the Spaniards to Christianity. Today they're a small minority, only about 5% of the population, and they're concentrated in the southern part of the Philippines, especially on the large island of Mindanao, which is really a large island. But people don't know very much about it, but it's actually a little bigger than Ireland. So it's really big enough to be its own country. So there are two things that distinguish the Moros that make them really stand out. And first is that they're the only major Philippine population that was never conquered and colonized by the Spaniards. They never became part of the Spanish colony that lasted for 350 years. Now, of course, the Philippines is all about Spanish influence. The name itself, right? The Philippines. Yeah. Many, if not most, Filipinos have Spanish surnames. Most of the place names are Spanish. There is, of course, Catholicism. Up till recently, the Philippines was the largest Christian country in Asia, right? Yeah. The only majority Christian country in Asia, and then tiny East Timor kind of got created, and that's now there's two of them. What happened to Filipinos under Spanish rule is that they were able to keep their languages, and there's still wonderful richness of language in the Philippines, but they lost most of their other pre-colonial culture. So traditional dress, music, religion, of course, and also political structure. Yeah. Now the Moros, because they weren't conquered, never lost their traditional culture. They still had and still have chieftains and princesses and shamans and magic. And in 1942, when the book starts, they were still fighting sword duels, right? They were still ruled by traditional nobility. So very different, kind of cultural stuff. Now, here's what's really interesting about it is that there's a tendency for some Christian Filipinos to think, well, we have nothing in common with those people, right? They're all Muslims. They're very, very different from us. And so they're just a different people. So, we have nothing to learn from them or to, they're just different. Yeah. But the fact is that Islam only made pretty modest changes to traditional culture of the Moros. And that culture, the traditional culture of the Moros, was the same as the traditional culture of the Philippines before the Spanish. So all of that stuff, right? Warriors and princesses and shamans, colorful dress, the Moros saved that culture, right? They maintained that cultural legacy for the whole Philippines, right? That is the legacy of everyone in the Philippines. And that's the legacy for Philippine Americans too. That's why one of the reasons I really want to, let young people, young Filipino Americans know about the Moros, because the Moros represent this very, very rich sort of treasure chest of culture that is the culture of the entire Philippines, the pre-colonial culture of the entire Philippines.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm loving all of this right now. I have to tell you, Tom, I completely agree. All of what I do know is exactly what you stated, about that pre-Christian, pre-colonization mindset culture. And from what I know of the Moros and moving down, and those aspects, those ties to the Muslim religion, and also, looking about how trade was occurring, when you learn about history, you learn about trade and how there was all of that going back and forth between Asia and the Philippines from my little bit of research. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. You know all about that. And so how especially those ties to India and all of that, which I'm sure you'll probably get into a little bit, but I'm loving this. And I have such a romantic feel for it too, right? Because
It is
to have a culture that hasn't been conquered and all of that. It's wow. And as I'm sure you see, I'm a Marvel head. And if you're familiar with like Black Panther in comics, Wakanda was never defeated. That's like the one civilization in like comic book form that was never defeated. So for me as a Filipino to know that we have a moral culture that's very similar to like comics where they've never been defeated and lived for so long is so romantic, so beautiful, and so inspiring. But I'll toss it back to you because I'm just nerding out right now to just know this history.
I can tell it resonates with you. I'm very happy for that. And I've got another tidbit for you in a minute to let you know that Muhammad Adil, the main character in my story, really thought of himself as a superhero, right, with supernatural powers. So there's a little bit of of Marvel in there as well. So the other way that the Moros are unique in the Philippines, or unique in general, is that they're the only Muslim population ever formally colonized by the United States, right? So the United States 100 years ago had a Muslim colony, the only one of its kind. It lasted about 40 years from 1902 to 1942. Now the Moros had a very special status in the American colony, right? That 40+ year colony, American, when the Americans colonized the Philippines. And that was mostly because of the American attitude about them. When the Americans seized the Philippines, if you will, and took it from the revolutionaries who were trying to create an independent country, a lot of the soldiers, including horse soldiers who were there, and some of those soldiers were in fact Buffalo soldiers, had a very recent memory of the Indian Wars of the West. That hadn't happened that long ago, right? Wounded Knee was 1890, which is considered the end of the Indian Wars. And American soldiers were in the Philippines by 1900. In the North, the Filipino soldiers that the Americans faced in the North wore uniforms. They marched in ranks. They were led by generals. So they were very familiar kinds of soldiers based on the European model. But when they went to the South and encountered the Moros in about 1902, the Moros wore colorful battle dress, individual acts of bravery. They used swords and lances. They were led by chiefs. All of that was very familiar to the soldiers fighting them. And in general, they became fascinated with the Moros, right? Because they were exotic and kind of noble warriors. And so Americans became fascinated with the Moros and started writing lots of stuff about the Moros. Mark Twain wrote about the Moros. Joseph Conrad wrote about the Moros. But when the Moros resisted colonization and the occupation of their territory, then they became, just like Native Americans, they became renegades and hostiles. They were actually called by the very same names, renegades and hostiles. They were hunted down and they were massacred in numbers even larger than the number of people massacred at Wounded Knee. In fact, the very largest massacre of indigenous people by the United States military happened not in the United States, but in the Philippines, in the southern Philippines. Mm. And the Moro Wars, in fact, they were called the Moro Wars because they were so similar to the Indian Wars, and they lasted almost 15 years. Yeah. The military occupation of the Moro South lasted until 1920. So that's sort of the background for the Moros. And my story starts 20 years later, after the end of the Moro Wars, right a few days after Pearl Harbor in December 1941. And what is amazing about that is now we have Moro fighters, Moro soldiers, in fact, in an American army fighting the Japanese in jungle warfare, being the very first American soldiers fighting the Japanese in jungle warfare, beating the Japanese, and doing it without guns. Yeah. So this is an extraordinary accomplishment, extraordinary story that happened just a month after Pearl Harbor, and the full story has never been told.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so many questions. But before we continue, I kind of want to maybe do a throwback to some previous episodes I had, if you will, sure. Of ShoPowSho. I had a guest, actor, filmmaker by the name of Christopher Wood. who's on ShoPowSho. And he is really trying to get this story about David Fagan. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I'm pretty sure you are.
Yeah.
He was an American Buffalo. I don't know if he was a Buffalo soldier, but Black American soldier that went to the Philippines and then eventually left disavowed, I guess, America and became part of the Philippine war effort against the Americans. Right. And then there's many stories and tales from that point onward. He's trying to make that a feature film reality. And that's why we've had him on to talk about that. I'm curious what you can share, maybe what you're familiar. And I would assume from what you're telling me, like he might have gotten with the Moros during that aspect of time, that with that confrontation that was occurring.
Well, he, as I remember, he was fighting in the north. Okay. So the Moro Wars actually started a little later. The Americans didn't go south and occupy the south until after they had defeated the armies in the north, defeated the armies in the north. Fagan is a remarkable individual, but he was not the only individual who changed sides in the north. Not the only American soldier, not the only Black American soldier. I can't remember whether he was a Buffalo soldier. He might have been. The 10th Cavalry was there. What I can tell you, again, my story starts, quite a bit later, 40 years later. Yeah. But I do talk about Black American veterans living in Mindanao in 1940, and Muhammad Adil knew at least 5 of them. And these were individuals who came over. In some cases, they came over right at the beginning, like at the same time as Fagan. In other instances, they might have come later, and maybe in 1920, even 25 or so, and served with the Philippine Constabulary or in some other part of the U.S. Army in the Philippines. And when they were mustered out of the Army, rather than going back home to what they probably considered to be, dangerous, difficult places without a lot of opportunities. They stayed in the Philippines, and they stayed in Mindanao. They were particularly interested in Mindanao, and they lived among the Moros, and in some cases married Moro women. And there were opportunities for them there. They could start rice mills, right? So rice mills were new. These rice mills were where people could bring their rice to be polished, so it became white rice. That was before the invention of diesel-powered rice mill. That was a very, very laborious activity to polish rice and make it white. And so they opened some of the very first rice mills. They married Moro women, and they became parts of the community. And there are still Moros today who are descendants of Black American soldiers and Moro mothers. And there was one individual in particular that I talk about in the book, whose father was actually a Black veterinarian for the 10th Cavalry, whose mother was a high-ranking Moro woman, who was one of the Moro heroes of World War II.
Wow. Again,
okay. This is also a story that's never been told. Yeah.
Amazing, and deserves to be told. I can't wait. Wait. So I have another question, but I'm gonna save that one till later. I kind of want to revert also back, since you brought up Muhammad Adil. I want to get back to a little bit of your story. So sure. You got the grant, you went to the Philippines. Talk to me about now that coming there for the first time. I want to know your journey, and then making your way to meet, that meeting Muhammad Adil, and just, being a white man in the Philippine country. And did you know the language? Did you already know the language from living in your time in San Francisco, and just going about making these connections to tell this story and your work as an anthropologist there?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. So I got to Manila in 1985, and this was the last full year of the Marcos dictatorship, and Manila was it just seemed like it was a tough, tired place, right? The dictatorship had been going on for 13 years at that point. There were, people were really struggling and suffering, but there was also a lot of really, really interesting, dynamic political activity. There's also a lot of danger, right? People were getting taken in the night and summarily executed. It was quite a dramatic time, and there's some really good books about that period I can let you know about. So I had connections in San Francisco Bay Area with folks who were involved in what was going on in the Philippines, and so I had people to show me around and guides. I spent some time in Manila. I had started learning Tagalog in San Francisco, and then I spent probably 3 months, two or 3 months, learning intensively in Manila. I learned Tagalog because the city I was working in the south, Cotabato City, is one of the few cities in the whole southern Philippines where they speak Tagalog. It's a particular historical reason for that. So I needed Tagalog to as a lingua franca in the south, and that worked out fine. When I got to the south, and found the community that I was going to live in, and met people who were, again, you sort of get taken from one person to the next, and this was all going on. Normally, there would be this kind of being passed from person to person, but there was an extra kind of quality to it because it was martial law, and because the dictatorship was going on, and because most of the people in that area were opposed, to the dictatorship. I also got taken around in these sort of different networks of people who were working underground, to resist the dictatorship, and so that was a really interesting experience as well.
I can imagine.
And but then I found the community I was going to stay in, called Campo Muslim. It was a slum in a swamp on the edge of Cotabato City, a poor place full of refugees from the war that had gone on between Marcos and the Moros 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier. And I was the first anthropologist in 12 years to be able to go there because this war had been raging throughout the South. So I was the first one in, and then I just started living in the community and living with a family and learning the local language, learning a Moro language. The Moros aren't a single people, so there are different ethnic groups among the Moros, and I learned a language called Maguindanaon. And I had research assistants that I worked with who were wonderful people and became great friends. And I mentioned in the book that the people in that community protected me and taught me like I was a child of the community. I mean, it was that warm and welcoming and open, and it's really quite extraordinary how how warm they could be to someone who they knew was from a country that was at that very moment supporting the dictator who was paying for the planes that had bombed them a few years ago, and the tanks and everything else. And so it was an extraordinary gift to me from them. And I've spent quite a few years since trying to make up, trying to repay that gift by telling as many people as I can about the Moros, about their struggle, and about their extraordinary deeds that have never been, most of which have never been fully recognized. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing and so beautiful, and wow. I'm sure that that it helped greatly to live amongst them, and I'm curious, what kind of, if there was any kind of resistance at first, and I guess to then build up their confidence and relay and share with you. When I think about those stories and I talk to my family and other aunts, uncles, and that time period, I got to be honest, even having Filipino blood, I was scared. And now fast forwarding into current history, and if you've seen recent ShoPowSho episodes, when now under Duterte's regime, I got scared, and now I'm scared again because the way the country is again now. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. But from what I know of the past in that time period, I think it's amazing and fascinating. Just your story in general, and experiencing that and building that confidence to learn the everything. So I guess now, so going back to that, and just as you shared, was there anything like remarkable and that just kind of blew your mind or fascinating as you were learning that sticks out
about the Moros?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a whole lot. I bet it'd be hard to pick out one or two things, but just to your first question was also in that portion there was also really, really good. And I think the best way to explain it in a nutshell, what I experienced there was that, and how the relationship grew, was that I went there as in my role as an anthropologist, and I told people who were struggling, people who had just had horrible experiences, and people were struggling every day just with finding food and safety. I told them that I was a student and I was there to learn as much about them as I could, and then so that I could tell the world their story, and that's all I had to give them. Right? I wasn't there to give them. I wasn't a missionary, anthropologist, or the exact opposite of missionaries. I wasn't there to teach them anything. I wasn't there to try to persuade them to a particular political position. I was just there to learn from them. That's kind of a rare thing, right? Particularly for people from America, right? Going to the Philippines, the whole project, right, of American colonialism, the whole formal project was this claim that they were going to teach Filipinos, how to have the right values so that they could then rule themselves, which is American colonialists were fooling themselves with that, and just pretending that they weren't real colonizers, which they were. But that's what I said, and what they said in response was, "That's great. We'd really like you to do that." And they said in response, they said, it says in the Holy Quran. In the Holy Quran, Muhammad says that seek knowledge even if you have to go all the way to China. So there's a famous saying by the Prophet Muhammad: seek knowledge even if you have to go all the way to China. And they said, you came all the way to the Philippines seeking knowledge, so we'll help you out. So that was how it worked there. Yeah. Wow.
All right. Yeah. So we're there. We're there, and as you stated earlier, the superhero Muhammad Adil. Tell me how that came about. How did you hear the inklings about this man, and then that first meeting and sharing of stories?
Sure. So I had been there about almost a year, living in the community, and I had heard about this very interesting individual, Muhammad Adil. They called him Major Adil then because he had his main rank. He was a military officer, was as a major, his previous rank, and we went. My assistants and I. This was an extraordinary day for the whole Philippines. It was the day after Marcos left the Philippines. The American helicopters came to Malacanang Palace and flew him out. It was a huge day of jubilation and celebration the next day in every city in the country. It was it was so wonderful to be able to be there for that. And so there was a huge rally, a victory rally in the plaza of Cotabato City, and we went. And one of the key speakers at the rally was Major Adil, and he was up on the stage. I'd never seen him before, but I'd heard his name, and he was up, and he had this loud, deep voice, and sometimes it would break into a roar, and he was talking about the evils of Marcos, and that the people who collaborated with Marcos were even more evil, and I said to myself, I have got to meet this guy. He's a really interesting person. And so within a couple of weeks, I was able to make the connection and go to his home and meet him. And what I found was this extraordinary individual who was both a man of action, but also this natural storyteller with this amazing memory. He was 63 years old at the time, salt and pepper, brush cut hair, military cut hair, these sharp cheekbones and these piercing hawk-like eyes, very, very handsome, and intense, but also very, very funny. And he just loved to tell stories. And I love to listen to stories because that's what anthropologists do. And so it was a perfect fit. And he also happened to be an anthropologist's dream because he had, not only did he have a remarkable memory, but he had a tremendous interest in traditional culture, right?
Wow.
All the, all the traditional stories, and he knew everything about everything. So it was just a wonderful working relationship. And I worked with him for 10 years. Wow. And would go to the Philippines on a regular basis, stay at his house for weeks at a time, and that working relationship became a fictive kinship relationship. I became his honorary nephew. I would call him uncle, and awesome. And this book is one of the products of that relationship. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So was it so? It was like an instant connection, or was there maybe a little bit of apprehension because here's this American, or do you think he was like, he saw the good in you and he was ready to open up?
Well, I'm not so sure that he saw the good in me. What he did have was he was predisposed to like Americans for a very particular reason. He had an American foster father.
Okay.
So he had a long-standing, a lifelong relationship with a man named Edward Cooter, who's the main secondary character in the book, who was a colonialist, a very interesting character, individual on his own, and he would take young men, Moro boys and men in who wanted to go to high school, who didn't have the money but who were promising. He was a superintendent of schools for the Moro provinces, and he would let them live at his house, and he would pay for their high school education. American books were very expensive, so a lot of families couldn't pay for them. Now, Muhammad Adil came from a fairly well-off family. He was a member of the nobility. His father could afford to pay for books, but what Muhammad Adil did was he ran away from home because he didn't like the school that his father had sent him to, an agricultural school, and he had a distant cousin who was one of Edward Cooter's students and living with him on this beautiful island in the middle of the Sulu Sea, where Muhammad Adil had been stuck up in the mountains, having to do agricultural labor every day. So at the age of 13, he ran away from home and sailed across the Sulu Sea and went to live with Edward Cooter, or appeared at Edward Cooter's door and said, "Hey, I want to come here and stay with you." Cooter, in his gruff voice, first thing Cooter said, he was an interesting guy. He said, "Did you come here to be baptized?" And Adil said, "No, I did not come here to be baptized." He said, "Good, because if you did, I would not take you," because Cooter was a child of missionaries, but he was actually very opposed to proselytization among Philippine Muslims, among the Moros, and he was very progressive in that way. And he had other good qualities as well, although he was also a classic colonialist in some ways. Wow. So Cooter said to Adil to ask your father if it's okay. His father eventually first said no, but his father eventually gave in because he knew how stubborn his son could be. And so Edward Cooter became his foster father in the Moro sense. It's a tradition among Moros to sort of lend your child to a relative or a friend for a period of time if you think that lending of the child would do the child some good, right? That would benefit the child. And so a Moro boy could have a real father, a real loving father like Muhammad Adil did, and also have a foster father. in Adil's case, his foster father was an American, and he remained he maintained a lifelong friendship with him.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. I had another question, but then another question came to mind. Just, again, just so many questions and so fascinating for me. The question that came to mind that erased the other one that I want to just throw out there before I forget it is because we're talking about this Muslim moral warrior, right, and Muhammad Adil, and you're Christian or well, you brought up UC Davis and Irish Catholic, and there's a lot of Filipino Catholics. As you're kind of making Muhammad Adil like your subject, right, and you're kind of a concentrated effort in your research, was there any resistance, being that you're kind of like from like people of Christian faith, or outside of that in your dealings with others during this time, that why are you talking about this guy, or because let's be honest, and which I'm sure again, you study history and anthropology, religion can always, it starts a lot of our wars and makes things difficult. So I'm just curious, in that aspect, did that come in the way of your research or focus when you were doing this?
It really didn't. And, again, it's a sort of a key tenet of anthropology that should never get in the way. And in my case, I was no longer a practicing Catholic. I had a very devout mother, to the point of fanaticism, and I had a lifetime worth of religion by the time I was 18. So I had kind of moved away from that, and that's just my personal history. And so when I was asked in the Philippines by the Moros, well, what's your religion? I would say honestly, right, that I'm seeking, right? I'm a seeker. I'm looking around. I don't have any particular religious belief now. I was raised as a Christian. I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm seeking, and that was was enough for them. Now, in the case of Muhammad Adil, he married a Christian. His wife was Catholic, and she formally converted to Islam when they married. But there was still a lot of, it was still sort of a mixed house in terms of Muslim and Christian influence. So he was very, he also had, he'd lived his whole life with, had Christian friends and Christian relatives, and so it was not an issue for him. Yeah, although he was in fact a very devout Muslim, a real and a very knowledgeable Muslim. Yeah. Awesome. A lot knowledgeable man of his faith. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. I'm happy to hear that, because as we all know, how religion can make things difficult and
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Let me tell you, if I can, because I want to get it in, because I promised it to you. When Muhammad Adil decided to go off to war, his father tried to keep him from war because he was very young, and his Adil was the grandson of two renowned warriors who were still celebrated in song in Mindanao. But his father was a child of colonialism, right? He was the first generation that had been colonized by the Americans, and when the Moros were finally defeated in 1920, it was a tough defeat, and so his father had no interest in being a warrior. He wanted to be a commercial farmer and a businessman. He was very good at those things, and he wanted his son to be that too. But his son had no interest other than being a warrior. His son wanted to be a warrior like his grandparents. So when his father tried to keep him away from the wars as long as possible, but then he got a letter from his foster father, the American, who was with the guerrillas, asking him to come visit, and his father then knew that, well, I have to let him go now. So in order to prepare him, he gave him a gun. He gave him two guns. He armed him, but he also sent for a Sufi master, a Muslim Sufi master, to teach him the secret knowledge of protective magic that had been passed among noble families in Mindanao for countless generations. And so they sat together for 7 Friday nights in a row, all night long, under a mosquito net with this special incense burning, and the Sufi master would whisper in his ear so no one else could hear at all. this special knowledge, and it was about protective spells and incantations, spells to paralyze your enemy or to beguile your enemy, spells to make your enemy so that he can't, not make you invisible, so that your enemy doesn't notice you. Also spells to make your enemy love you, and which also work on young women, according to Muhammad Adil as well, and then also amulets and potions and other kinds of things, protective magic. Adil really believed in that protective magic, and he really believed that he was, that he was a sort of a superhero, that he had supernatural abilities. Now he was naturally fearless, absolutely fearless, but he was very curious to test this magic that he'd learned to see if it actually worked. And so he was always like going right up to the edge, right? During the war, putting his men in. He would encounter the enemy more than anyone else. But amazingly, he never lost a single man killed for the entire course of the war. He was bulletproof. Wow. And he was in some amazing situations as well. And he was considered safe to be around. So men wanted to follow him because they had the attitude that if they stayed close to him, they wouldn't get hurt. Yeah.
Amazing. You know what? That prompted another question in regards to fighting skills and talent, right? Again, this is one of the oldest, cultures, and then with the Americans coming in with their weapons and the Spanish with their weapons and the like. I know Eskrima, Arnis, there's a lot of martial arts that came from the Philippines that I'm still learning about and getting knowledge on. Does any of that come from Moros, or were there specific styles? What did you learn about how they fought? And I've seen like amazing swords and blades from Moros in my research. What can you tell me about that and what you learned with Mr.
Most of the martial arts. So I never heard about Arnis and in the South among Moros.
Okay.
That seemed to be more, and the stick arts seemed to be more in the North.
Okay.
When Moros fought traditionally, they fought with blades. And there are various kinds of blades, but the main blade was a short sword called a kris. You probably heard of that.
Yes.
With a wave blade.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Beautiful sword. Beautiful metal work. And those swords themselves were thought to have magical properties as well. And the swords had names, and swords would get passed down as heirlooms from generation to generation. And there were various kinds of swords. There were long swords and short swords, and these really interesting kinds of two-handed, long-handled machetes, which are more sort of like battle axe, like a cross between a sword and a battle axe. They were also very effective weapons, and the Moros actually used those to pretty effectively in up through World War II. Yeah.
Wow. So fascinating. Okay. I'm just trying to connect the dots from stuff I know, and I'm curious if it's connected. So I appreciate you letting me know where the areas are, because I don't know. And that's why we're here learning. And I'm thanking you so much for that. As I was talking, and again, I vomit at the mouth sometimes, so I do apologize. Tattooing, I know really, is a large part of our culture. And then it expanded out into the Pacific. Was that any involved with the Moros at all?
No, I'm really glad you asked that question, because remember I said earlier that when the people of the southern Philippines converted to Islam, the changes to their culture were fairly moderate, and that's really true. But most of the changes were sort of external changes to symbolic changes to sort of let people know, right, that you're that you've got this new world religion. One of those, the most well-known, was they stopped eating pork, right? So that if you, the main thing, the main identity as a Muslim, well, we don't eat pork, okay? And that's really carried through. That was the strongest kind of single behavioral change. but there are also some changes in appearance because of certain certain rules or preferences in Islam that originally came from the Middle East. People all changed the way they look. So prior to Islam, and prior to Spanish colonialism, but it's interesting. Spanish colonialism and Islam had, or let's just say Catholicism and Islam had similar effects on the people who converted. Men used to wear and women wore their hair long. Men would wear their hair quite long as women. Traditionally, men would cut their hair on their first birthday and then never cut it again. And they'd wear it kind of curled around on top of their head with maybe a basket hat covering. With conversion Islam, men cut their hair because men were supposed to have short hair. So that went away. Also, tattooing was the other thing that went away. So prior to Islam, warriors were tattooed with extraordinary tattoos, as you know.
Yeah.
And some of them, pictures of those tattoos survive from Spanish sources. But that was the other thing that got stopped with conversion to Islam, was because that was considered to be not something you should do to your body anymore. So that that went away. Yeah.
Okay. Man, I love this. I'm just, because again, Moros, were that indigenous part of the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
But now I'm formulating these sections now, the northern, southern areas, and I'm curious how just all these cultures, as we've stated, changed and manipulated and kind of grew into what I know. It's fascinating.
It's fascinating. It's a complex place, and there was a lot going on, and but there are these really interesting patterns that the people throughout the islands, from the tribal people who live in the hills of the north to the sea people of the south. There's a pre-colonial culture that was shared, and it's still alive in parts of the Philippines. Yeah, and it's the cultural legacy of all Filipinos.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it can vary, and it's totally believable if for people, I don't know, for myself, and if there's people that don't believe it, I think there's so many islands, and it can happen in that respect. People stay to their own in different ways. And so, no, I'm so fascinated and just loving this. I want to now go back again, if you don't mind. I'm also looking at time. I apologize if I'm throwing so much at you, because I'm so intrigued, since I have you. So you're there, you meet Adil, you tell me, you were there initially for, I guess, for your initial research for like 2 years, and then you went back. And so why was it that you decided to go back and now and just into your history, and then making this kind of your life's work, if you will, and then leading to this tremendous book that we have? I want to know your journey, and then going back, and then culminating into this, and then doing what you do, and providing this history and more history that you're going, as you said earlier, that you want to give back to the Moros that gave of their time to you.
Well, it's a complicated story, but as all lives that are as long as mine is now tend to be complicated. But I went back in order to spend more time with Muhammad Adil, to learn more from him, to hear more of his stories, to collaborate with him on various things, and that lasted more than 10 years. And then and I write about this in the book, and it's sort of the difficult section. I had a career change. I was living in. I'm from San Francisco. I was living in Birmingham, Alabama, and I lived there for 10 years with my family. I was a professor at the university there, and had gotten tenure, and I realized that I needed to get back to the West Coast. I just needed to get back to a place that had that was on the Pacific Rim, a place that was closer to Asia. Birmingham, when I was there, there was, we think about it this way: there are basically no Filipinos in Birmingham.
It's a culture
right?
shift. I lived in the South, so I
Okay.
can feel you on that one. I can't imagine going from San Francisco to Alabama. That's
It was
something.
a big change. And so when I did, it's very hard to shift jobs in academia. So I shifted to sort of a quasi-academic position in a research center in the Bay Area. And I naively thought that I could keep all the balls in the air and keep doing everything I'd been doing. I was working on this, the original book that this one was based on, and still doing research with the on the Moros and writing various things about the Moros. And what I found, what happened eventually was that it just got, because my new research was different from my old research. It wasn't about the Philippines, and I got taken more and more away from it. And my ties with Muhammad Adil waited, after a while. And I tried to, I kept contact, but I just had to put something down for a while to kind of get my life in order. And I dropped the ball, right? And it's not something I'm proud of or happy about, but I dropped the ball for about 10 years. And by the time I picked the ball up again, and was able to put the energy back into finishing this book and writing other stuff about him, he had passed on. And so it's as I write in the book, this is a posthumous tribute to him, and a way to tell him that I never forgot. I kept my promise, but it's tough. It's unfortunate, and I'm in some ways ashamed of the fact that it took so long. But on the other hand, life is complicated. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm sure he's looking down, and just thankful. And my condolences on the loss of your friend. But this is an amazing tribute. This is an amazing tribute, and it's going to help.
Still in contact with his children, and they're really happy that the book is out, and
awesome.
They like it.
So yeah. So in that regard, you put it together, and so the family hears about it, and what has that been like, and now bringing this story to the world, and coming here and talking to me, and sharing, what has that reception been like in learning Muhammad Adil's story?
Great. I know you've talked to a number of writers, and I'm sure they all tell you that writing is it's a lonely task.
Oh yeah.
You're a writer yourself, so you know all about
that.
And when a project, a very large and long-standing project like this is finished, and I can finally take it out to the world, it's just been wonderful to get it out there, to do shows like this, and to tell people about Muhammad Adil and hear their responses. And another one particular fact about this book is that, again, I'm a former academic. All the previous stuff I've written has been academic material, which means it's sort of geared to a fairly narrow professional audience. I decided long ago that would not work with Muhammad Adil's story, that his story demanded a larger audience, an international audience, obviously, but a larger audience of people who were interested more generally in the Philippines, in World War II, in Islam, and Muslim populations, all of that stuff. And so it's been particularly wonderful to be able to talk to people who aren't anthropologists, or who aren't historians, or who aren't specialists in the Philippines, and tell them the story and have them say, wow, I had no idea, this is amazing. I had no idea this was going on in World War II in the Philippines. I had never heard of the Moros. So that's, it's very gratifying. I tell myself, better late than never. I finally got the story out. I'm finally telling the world about Muhammad Adil, and I think he's looking down as well.
I love that. I love that. And I got to tell you, you probably hit the nail on the head by contacting me and reaching out because of you've seen the show and everything I'm trying to do. That's like my new goal in life, if you will. Like, this show has been so amazing for me as a creative and as a filmmaker and as a writer. And the relationships I've found from community has been so fulfilling. That's just like my mission now, and learning more, and through you in this amazing book, and this culture and this people that I know of my culture. Like, you reached out, you found a filmmaker, and I'm looking for properties I want to make. So I kind of hinted earlier, like, there's a lot of things I'm writing about and working on, and so maybe I can help, or if not myself, the other amazing group of filmmakers that I know watch this show and are mining my show for content and material. You found the right people. So hopefully we can help pave the way for you. And Muhammad Adil, the superhero, can now be portrayed on the big screen and be our Filipino Black Panther, if you will.
He would love that more than anything. He would really love that.
Amazing. So Moro Warrior, y'all, it's out there. I'll have all the links and everything in the description. Where are we going now post Moro Warrior? As you said earlier, you still have more stories you want to tell and get out there. What more is there that you can maybe speak on that you can't speak on, because I'm sure you're probably keeping some close to the vest and you don't really want to put it out there yet. But what more can we expect from Tom McKenna and your work? That you've invested your life into this.
Well, I can tell you that this is the first of a two-part story. The first part of a two-part story. This story this book ends in 1946. Muhammad Adil lived the entire rest of the 20th century. This is what I'm trying to do with this book is to write the history of the Moros in the 20th century through the life of a single individual, extraordinary individual, Muhammad Adil. Muhammad Adil went on to have an amazing life after the war. He fought many more gun battles. He chased pirates and outlaws as an officer in the Philippine Constabulary. He was like the federal marshal in the Wild West of Mindanao in the 1950s. He chased smugglers. He had an amazing career, and then when two things happened. First, when Ferdinand Marcos became president, and he took Adil's commission away. He took Muhammad Adil's commission away. Essentially, ran him out of the army because he was afraid. He was essentially afraid of him, and he was punishing a political enemy. Wow. And then when Marcos declared martial law, Muhammad Adil had to choose. What do I do? Do I stay on the side of my former companions in the military who are now fighting for a dictator and who are attacking my people, or do I defend my people? The answer was obvious. He became a rebel officer, eventually a rebel general, and had a whole new life as a different kind of Moro warrior. A rebel general in the Moro National Liberation Front. Wow. And it's a story that has what looks like a happy ending, because after almost 50 years of fighting the Philippine government in a hot and cold war, the Moros have now signed an agreement. The Philippine government has signed an agreement with the Moros to give them genuine autonomy in their traditional homeland.
Wow. That's so fascinating. And yeah, I want to know that, how you did that change up and how life continues and what you still do. That's so fascinating as well to me. Another question came to mind. I'm sorry, I'm just throwing them at you. And I kind of talked about it earlier for my personal reasons. with politics, and then now we have Bong Bong is now there, right?
Right.
With your knowledge of Adil and what do you think he'd feel with the climate and how now the son's back in power? I'm kind of curious with what you know of him.
I'm kind of glad he didn't live to see that. It's been extremely painful.
You think it would have, yeah.
For me and for others of my generation who witnessed the dictatorship firsthand, and I guess we have to wait and see. But it's it's a sad case. But as I tell others, as an American, I have no right to say anything about Philippine politics because we're dealing with our own situation.
Very true. Very true. So then I guess what would you say is the story of the Moros that people can learn as a good closeout with this, that with your work and everything you've learned and you've put into this book, what can the world as a whole learn from the Moros?
The Moros are a people who have demonstrated tremendous resiliency against extraordinary odds. The story of the Moros in the 20th century is a story of first of fighting hard and eventually being defeated by the American government, and then but then turning around and fighting for the American government to defend their own homeland during World War II, and made an extraordinary contribution to the liberation of the Philippines, a contribution that has never been properly recognized by the U.S. government or the Philippine government. And then after having made that contribution, they then had to fight once more, a third time in the 20th century, against the Philippine government itself, against Ferdinand Marcos, to defend their homeland from yet another occupation. They were occupied 3 times in the 20th century, and they are still strong. They still have a rich and vibrant culture, and they are still warm and generous and wonderful people.
Wow. Tom McKenna, thank you. And I look forward to the next book, and I can't thank you enough. And I look forward to fully reading more War on my trip to San Diego Comic-Con. This was
told it's cinematic, so you might like it. Yes.
Oh, I know I am. Yeah, I think if you couldn't tell already with the entire time, this is right up my alley, and I'm so thankful for you sharing. And again, you put your life, literally into this to understand, and I can't thank you enough for that. Would love to have you back as we dive into this more in other episodes, and as I learn more. I know I'm going to have questions. I would love to speak with you, and then hopefully when that other book drops too, we can show you love and light when that comes. I want to close it out with an easy question, and it's kind of like our final question anyway, and it helps us learn a little bit more about our guests as well, because my channel is called Nerds Rule the World, NRW, home of the ShoPowSho. We like to end it with like a nerd check. How much of a nerd are you? So obviously we know you're an anthropologist. We know you know more about Moro history. So give me something else that Tom McKenna is nerdy about that maybe not too many people know. What do you like outside of researching history? What do you geek out about? Are you a Star Trek sci-fi guy, or are you into I don't know, card games? It can be anything, just for my audience to just know a little bit more about our guests.
Oh, I'm nerdy about a whole lot of things. I'm reading Neil Stephenson's latest novel, and I think he's the coolest guy ever, the coolest sci-fi writer, and I've gotten so much entertainment from him, and he's a real hero to me, and I know he's a hero to a lot of nerds as well. Also, I do I've been doing Tai Chi for a long time, and I don't know if that counts as a nerdy thing, but it is kind of
it's something you're passionate about. I think being a nerd is something you're passionate about.
Yeah, I'm real passionate about it, and it's a great martial art for someone my age, and but it's also great for all ages, and it's there's a lot of magic in it. That's all I can say. I
love it. All right, Tom, you're the best. Thank you for coming through, sharing, reaching out, and giving us this work, being an ally. It's beautiful, and I can't wait to dig in more and learn more. And as I'm working on my other projects, again, like I said, I'm mining for other content, and I know mutuals that I share with projects where we're getting forward. We'll love to learn more about the Moro Warriors, and maybe reach out to you as well. So with that being said, for the people that are watching as well, I'll have the information in the description below. But for those that might be driving while listening to this, for those people listening, how can they find you online? If we can maybe put out some of the socials.
Sure, you can find me at my website, www.morowarrior.com, MORO warrior, one word.com. I'm old school, so I'm all about the website. But I do have a Twitter handle, which is at TMMCK. At TMMCK. You can find me there as well.
There we go. Thomas McKenna, truly a pleasure. Honor to have you. And again, I love it. And thank you. Everybody, your boy, Kuya P, the legend Kuya P, on Twitter, TikTok, and IG. Of course, AAPI Toy Heroes, my Asian representation within toys podcast that's brand new. I got more episodes coming. I know there's only 2 right now, but there's more on the way. And of course, ShoPowSho, and at the NRW and at Release Wednesday, where nerds rule the world. Thomas McKenna, Moro Warrior, your boy Kuya P. Until next time, mahal kita, salamat.
Hi, this is Tom McKenna, anthropologist and author of Moro Warrior, which is a true adventure story about the Moro freedom fighters of World War II in the Philippines. You can find Moro Warrior on Amazon, at your local bookstore, or at your local public library. If you don't know exactly who the Moros are, you got to come check me out on the ShoPowSho with Kuya P. And you can also find more about me and about the book at www.morowarrior.com.